Hello, Startup TNT, and welcome to the very first event of 2021, Startup TNT Week 87, Spoken Word with Nisha Patel, Edmonton's Poet Laureate. I'm really excited about this. It's a brand new year. Nisha's here to share some poetry that's relevant to all of us about Edmonton, about the pandemic, about life in general. Listen, tonight, I normally drink beer, but I don't have a beer delivery. I'm drinking martinis. I don't know. Nisha, are you drinking anything tonight, or are you just hanging out with us? Water? Is that water?
Just water. Yeah, nice and sober
water.
tonight.
Good
It's
choice.
Thursday, so.
Listen, we meet every single Thursday, Nisha. We've been doing this for 87 weeks, and I'm going to share with you one really important number that just came through. 1.365. $1.365 million is how much money TNT investors put into 10 different startups from the Alberta ecosystem in 2020. That's incredible. That's freaking incredible. Just from hanging out, having fun, making friends, building companies together every single Thursday. And I'm a big believer in us acting as like a cohesive ecosystem, reconvening people from the arts community, the investor community, the science community, the entrepreneurship community in general. So I'm super happy to have Nisha here with us. She is Edmonton's Poet Laureate, and this event is sponsored by the Writers Union of Canada. You can request Nisha to speak at your event by going to the Writers Union of Canada website. And the only other thing I'm going to say is we're starting off 2021 at Startup TNT with a bang. We've got two different events that are going on over the next 3 months. One is an investment summit in Saskatchewan, and one is a clean tech summit happening right here in Alberta. Where we're looking to invest in some clean tech companies that are going to help us build back better, as they say. I'm super excited about that, but you know what? I don't really want to take any more time because this show is all about Nisha Patel. Nisha, say hello. What are we going to do tonight?
Cool. I'm going to share some poems that I've written over the last few years. Some I've written kind of in the last month or so. And my job as a Poet Laureate for the city is generally to kind of reflect the times and the history of the place that we're in, so the concerns of the people. And one of the poems I'm going to do tonight was not received very well by City Council, mostly because it was calling out government negligence. So I'll just preview that one a little bit. But some of my other work has been very gentle. It's been very celebratory of the city. I'm someone who's lived here my whole entire life. I went to business school, actually, so I know a lot of the startup culture and the people around that. I know there's like such a vivacious community here doing good things for people, right? And it's interesting for me because I think it's very easy to label a poet as someone who is an activist or an agitator, but in reality, like, artists have always reflected the circumstances that people have lived in, dating, back thousands of years. And the connection between the artistic community and the startup community or the innovation community, right? Entrepreneurship, all of that is very, very close, right? Like, we can't have new products without new marketing. We can't have bylines and stories written or ad copy and stuff like that. And all of that comes from very creative people, and I really try to reject this like really antiquated notion of like, the two-sided brain or the left side and the right side, the good at math and bad at art or whatever it is, because I think that many of us are showing, especially in the pandemic, that we come from multitudes of skill sets, right? That we're good at these things that are, sometimes side hustles and sometimes full-time jobs. So I'm going to share kind of a breadth of things that I've written about, some of them more gentle and more reflecting, other things a little bit more angry, I think, and relevant to today. They will try to tell me that I wasn't born on champion streets, that this city was built for dripping oil rig noses and loonies drowned in ice. They will run me over with pickup truck slang and claim that Edmonton will only embrace me when I have learned to accept the privilege that is remaking yourself on new land. But I grew up avoiding cracked cement and ice like glass, swatting mosquitoes on sunburned backs, spinning bike tires to the local max, and watching Cinema City movies on the cheap. You see, I come from Millwoods, where love may speak 24 languages, but the skirts of colored girls are universally too short. Where going downtown is yellow brick road / capital ETS experience, and I am always running on bus transfer time. So although you try to question it, I don't wonder if I am Edmonton yet, because my heart knows this city, bleeds it in like black asphalt poured on broken promise roads. My heart loves like the sun loves the August long weekend, with an unforgiving heat, steaming Heritage Day tents white. There's an uncomfortable trickle of sweat on back every time you meet my eyes, like my city, I am worth sweating for. My body breathes in Horlac cook fires and green grass rubbed raw underfoot, exhales at the optimism of the first snow melt in March, sighs regretfully at February's false hope sunshine. My eyes see through frosted lashes, greet summer like the return of the prodigal. These are my Edmonton hands, been growing them for 28 years. They hold habits passed down from lands I've never seen that now pocket library cards, carry possibility for new beginnings in each palm. And these are my Edmonton calves, weaned on spring, summer, fall, winter, all-season soccer games, Canada Day dances, and Sikh pride parades. They may keep me moving out of this city to find my history in storied buildings and beach oceans singing songs of my family's yesterday, but they will always take me back to the place I want to be. So don't try and pull Edmonton out from underfoot. My prints are all over these soccer fields, carving my initials into Edmonton's snowy white skin. I am an Edmonton girl, and I have always been home. So that one is what used to be what I used to call one of the mayor's favorites before, he was a little bit more upset with me. I still really like doing it just because I think it shows the dedication we have. And of course, I think for all things that people criticize, many of these feelings come from places of love, the want for something to be better than it is, to reach its full potential. And so I really try to keep that in mind as I move forward, even with pieces that tend to critique, especially those in power, as they should always be critiqued by the people. So this next poem was written, it started in November when we first peaked with 1,000 new COVID cases a day. And it's a living poem. And so for every death in the province, I add one word to this poem from COVID-19. So the last update for this poem was December 14th. I'm working on the new update now, which is unfortunately much, much higher. And so as of December 14th, the poem had 719 words. And when I started writing it in November, it had 432. On the day Lewis Hamilton becomes the first Black man to win 7 Formula One championships, Alberta breaks 1,000 new COVID cases. My mother cancels Diwali while my relatives return to work for the 270th day in a row, packing food and Christmas flyers and staffing emergency rooms in infested hospitals. The premier takes to radio shows to blame everyone but himself, asking for me and my people to wake up, and neither my city councillor nor my mayor defends us. Women around the world share tearful congratulations about Kamala Harris's ascension to vice president of the free world, leaving out the names of trans women who will die under police brutality. Canadians as a whole are nothing like our neighbors until Regis Korchinski-Piquet and Ijaz Chaudhry are both murdered without consequence. Then the tune changes, and it's Edmonton that's nothing like Toronto. Meat Off-White puts out more patio heaters to keep afloat as boutique stores down the Ave go out of business without rent relief or aid. I've never caught COVID trying on shoes, but I'm sure the brisket is worth it. Curfew is now 10 o'clock, which means happy hour still ends at 8. And when we run to the old Max for eggs, we hold our breath so the bar crowd buying lottery tickets don't fog up our glasses. Hope has become a scarce commodity. And as usual, it is the minorities who can't vote that run out first as they pick up shifts delivering groceries so that federal governments have nothing to claw back. I've heard a rumor that the casinos are booming. Elderly folks die in private care homes without a last Christmas, while Indian mothers who work 2 jobs keep up with being good immigrants on both Sal Mubarak and New Year's Eve. Young radicals are attacked on Twitter for their vision of a freer future, while popular radio hosts platform white women playing devil's advocate. Grieving sons and daughters share screenshots of their final moments with their parents as grandmas line up for a vaccine that has been rumored to not be promised to anyone but the NHL. Lewis Hamilton contracts COVID. misses an entire Formula One race, comes back in a week to end the season in a car with the names of every support staff who sacrificed their health so that I could sit on my couch and watch him drive for pleasure. On campus, international students pay extra to quarantine in a country that thinks them worthless, while cashiers at brand name grocers charge 5 cents for plastic bags that will end up in salt water. A man dies in a hospice with only his staff to eulogize him. Every week, I call my father and my doctor, both of whom care about my pancreas more than my pancreas cares about me, and think about how saying I'm disabled or queer or brown are all comorbidities. My astronaut friend talks at length about Mars, and for a second, I daydream before I remember that she too was told to wake up to the reality that this is her fault. Teens take up the mantle to uphold treaty and save the lives of those the city wishes didn't exist. The city wishes harder, shoves bodies into a convention center, and hopes the people with the votes are appeased that no tax dollars have been wasted. In fact, the city does not raise taxes, so I lay awake and wonder which part of the Municipal Government Act, Section 7, prevents the city from spending money in a crisis in the name of safety, health, and welfare of people. But then again, I've only spent 10 years studying politics, so what would a property-less millennial like me know about it? I think about Christmas, I think about starvation, I think about home, how being human makes me worthy of at least one of these things. And your worship, mostly I think about death, how my faith in politics died first in a refrigerator truck, then a field hospital, how I took one word for everybody in this province who died a preventable death and wrote a poem, 719 words, one for every child that grew and loved under the hands of collective negligence. How eloquent it will make me tomorrow. So of course, as you know, the count is so much higher. And, there's so many different ways to connect to the scale of grief and tragedy. And art has been one of those connection points for me to remind myself of my own humanity and the humanity of these people, which sometimes can feel faceless, but are in fact, loved ones, their mothers and fathers and daughters and sons and, trans folks and frontline workers. And so this was my way of contributing, I think, positively to the conversation while still trying to hold people in power accountable. One of the other poems that I did this past year, which feels so long ago, back in February.
Nisha, do you mind if we pause for a moment and just
discuss? Yeah, we can totally pause now. That's totally fine.
And I just want to make one statement, or one observation, which is I actually think it's really powerful for the city of Edmonton or for any government to provide funding to an artist that can use their art to help us all challenge our basic beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you should keep challenging our beliefs. I think that's one of the powers of art. I heard a couple things in there about how immigrants might feel in our community, how we're pretending to save the world, but we're still littering the world with plastic bags in the ocean. And so I just think it's important for all of us to kind of hear that and reflect on it. And
and I think these touch points, these points of connection to other people and to each other, these are all things that we want to encourage, right? We want people to feel connected. We want them to be invested in their community. And honestly, I grew up being told that a woman should not be angry, right? That a woman should not be outraged, that it's not very ladylike. And I think it took me a really long time to realize that I wasn't very ladylike because I am angry all the time. And it's incredibly important for me to embrace that as a vehicle for change, and I can see my friend Lauren is in the chat as well, and Karen, and Lauren and I were in business school together, right? And I think at the same time, we also came up in a system where we were angry all the time. We were angry at the people around us. There were some students around us who came from 3 generations of wealth versus me. And I came from, a father that worked in a factory for years, night shifts and day shifts, 18 hours in a row sometimes, so that I could be able to go to school. And I think there's places for that type of anger to be a function of change, and to fuel us forward into positive things. And it's also it's the same thing as the frustrations and, the lack of efficiency that invites people to be innovative, right? These are all emotions on the same spectrum that drive change. And so when I talk about the connection between the two communities, I think they have to work together because there's no way for them to really separate themselves.
Yeah, I mean, and on a personal level, you just mentioned Lauren Brisk is a good friend of yours. She runs Startup Edmonton.
She does. Yeah, I'm super proud of her. We spent a lot of time together in business school.
So that's awesome. Okay, I'm going to encourage people if they're listening in, to chime in with any questions you might have. Before you move to the next poem, Nisha, do you mind telling us a little bit about like your writing process? Like,
yeah, for sure.
How do you write your poetry?
Yeah, so like I said, I went to business school, and I wasn't a writer then. I majored in business law and leadership, and that was something that I really wanted to do. And after that, I ended up working for 3 years in politics. And so I worked for 2 different mayors in the Edmonton area. And that was what I thought my life was about. And I started picking up writing about 6 years ago, kind of as a hobby. And I found that there was like these moments where, you're on stage in front of a crowd. It's a little different now, but you're on stage in front of a crowd and you're able to influence the way people think in that moment, right? Even if it's just a tiny moment, even if someone only remembers one thing you've said. And I found that everything I had tried to do in politics was about changing individual lives, improving them for the better. And this was a new way to do that. And so I ended up working towards, saving enough money to really leave politics behind and pursue a career in the arts. And so at first I used to write as a hobby. I would do it for very few shows that I would have per year. And then I started writing for competition and I was competing in poetry slams. And I made it all the way to nationals. I won nationals. I would have been at the World Cup, but it got canceled with the pandemic, which really sucks. And, competition became the drive for me. And now without that kind of overhanging of competition, I really write for what I'm most passionate about. And so, I'd like to say that I write in areas where I'm calm and, composed, but most of the time I'm writing because I feel overwhelmed by emotion. Sometimes it's sadness, sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's grief. I wrote a 14-minute love poem in order to propose to my fiance. Like, these are overwhelming emotions that really drive my writing practice. And I'm very lucky because I'm in a position where I get to write every week if I can, and some people I wrote my first book. It comes out April 1st after 2 years of being in the publishing process. And I got really tired of people saying they were going to write their book. Friends of mine are like, I'm going to sit down and write my book one day when I don't work as much, when I don't do this as much. And I was like, what do I care about more? Do I care about making that much money? Or do I want to take that time to do something that's not going to have any income for a while? And I'm finding that the Edmonton community loves art. They've really embraced it. And I am able to have a full livelihood working in the arts community as both an arts organizer and as a writer.
Okay, that's awesome and very inspirational. I also write when overwhelmed with emotions, but not nearly as eloquently as you. So let's hear some more writing.
Yeah, for sure. So this poem was written as a commission. So again, one of the things I do is write when people pay me to. And this one in particular ended up becoming very emotional for me. So it was originally written for Climate Justice Edmonton. And as you know, tech innovation is hand in hand with climate justice and the fight for that. And so at the time I was like, this is just a small thing I'm doing. And I ended up performing it in a big event in a church. And kind of the silence of the seriousness of climate denial was something that I really felt when I was performing it. Questions for Google Assistant at 4 a.m. Okay, Google, define life. Define the capacity for growth. Define functional activity. Define continual change. Okay, Google, do you know where the last koala lives? Do you know how she is treated like a queen? How she wears the memory of her lost daughters and sons deep within the follicles of her fur, how even the sound of their laughter as they fell from the last eucalyptus tree cannot bring them back. Okay, Google, do you know what the octopus say when we're asleep? How they have grip enough for strangling, how they would rise against us if not for the blood they refuse to spill, how life itself is sacred, even on the ocean floor. Okay, Google, will we learn to breathe underwater in time to save the dolphins? What of the spiders? Is there anyone who will outgrow loneliness when we are gone? The scene. A fat woman is drowning. There are men at the shore. The stage is an ocean. No one helps. And what is the ocean if not a woman? The way they take and take of her body, entanglement nets imprinting on flesh, the space between her legs, yet another man's bycatch, the way they pull her up by her hair, leave her on the wharf for the bleeding, how they hunger with full stomachs for the taste of her, lick the salt from her eyes and say they are still starving, watch as her coral reef organs collapse on themselves. I was an ocean once. Bare shoulders and whale song in my rib cage, I watched as the rigs drilled holes in my body. They left no part of the trenches unmanned, turned me into a war instead of a homecoming. I should have evaporated sooner, left this ozone and oozed into the stars. The scene, the stage is an ocean. No one helps. And what of the human race that has learned so little and so much about the earth, how she moved beneath us once? Are we not estranged lovers? And the ancestors of this place, those who were tricked into treaty, who lived for thousands of years before us, the story keepers and the secret tellers, fought for a truth they've known since the start, that the universe knows of our greed, knows of our follies and our steam engines, of our clocks and brick houses, of our gold and our borders and our lust, but also of our vast and wide hearts, our clasped hands and protests, our demands and our dreams and our children, people that can still come together against the draining and the gutting of the ground, the burning of the forests, the scent of coal and gasoline, fueled hope that spills across a prairie sky. It is a characteristic of life itself that all that is living must die. Okay, Google, define life, the capacity for growth, continual change. Define death, the fact of dying, being killed. Define resistance, refusal to accept, refusal to comply. Some days I cannot see past the blood on my hands. I read names like a eulogy. The leopards, the gorillas, the elephants, the sea turtles, the rhinos, the tigers. God, how I never wish to outlive the tigers. On those days, I uncurl my back, I breathe, I drink water like it is a privilege. Think of the slumdogs in the streets of India dying in the heat, and it is indeed a privilege. I stand at the edge of the precipice, both feet on the ground, look the thirsty children in the eyes, and I write. Thank you.
That was amazing.
Thank you. My audience of one on screen, but of course my partner is always in our apartment, so I always try to remember that we're not alone in this tiny box.
No, that was very powerful. I don't know, I had thoughts while you were reading that about kind of like the meaning of life, and I actually just watched this movie that kind of addressed this called Soul. It's a fun cartoon movie. It actually has kind of addresses sort of a similar topic about like the greater meaning, that what we're all here for and what are we trying to accomplish. And anyways.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, how many more readings do we have, Nisha, before you have to go?
I was hoping to open it up to any questions, okay, and talk a little bit about anything anyone kind of wants to ask me about, basically, and ask me anything. But also, yeah, like I think the artistic practice, I have a commercial up with Alberta Innovates that I did a voiceover for them that I wrote, and I thought it would be too much like a classroom to play it. So I'm just going to encourage everyone to go find it. It's on the Alberta Innovates page and on their YouTube. But that was a really interesting mix of both the innovation sector as well as like the creative arts. And so that was one of the most fun projects I've done in the last 6 months. And the goal of that was to create an ad copy that would try to inspire other people to look into what Alberta Innovates does and kind of what's going on in the city. And so the poetry around that, you know, some days it feels like spoken word, other days it feels like, you know, just a girl talking. But I think it really hit all those boxes. And so that was a really cool project that I did. I'm working right now potentially with an affordable housing corporation and trying to figure out how do we tell the story of the people who are involved in these human services, right? And the innovation needed for that sector is also like super, super high, right? I worked in municipal government, I worked in municipal politics. And what we're finding is that by the time these solutions reach politicians, sometimes they're 4 or 5 years old, you know, by the time they can actually be implemented. So all the innovation has to be happening now, right? For the solutions for 2025, like you need to be doing the research now. Question from Karen Tang. What was the most challenging poem you wrote? I would have to say it's the poem that I wrote for City Council about the COVID deaths. That was very, very challenging for me because there were moments where I sat there and I was like, this is the grief of 400 deaths. This is the grief of 700 deaths. And that was just so much to internalize, you know, and to put that on a single person's shoulders was very different. But at the same time, like when I read that poem out loud to Mayor Iveson and to council, you know, there was moments where I was like, this matters, these lives matter, and I'm able to honor them in this way. I also have a part 2 to that. It's also hard for me to write love poems because for many years I've been writing very political stuff. My book coming out is all very political. Some of it has to do with sexuality, with gender, with oppression and racism. And it's not an easy book to read. You know, most people who read it think it's quite sad, but in an empowering way, I would want to say. So, you know, it has been challenging to allow myself to be someone who's in a public space, but also taking up space for tenderness and for kindness and for love.
Nisha, I have a really basic question, which is how does one become the Poet Laureate?
Yeah, you actually just apply. You obviously you have to get through the interview and the application process and the swearing in and all of that. But, you know, the Edmonton Arts Council, which is a fantastic organization that does all the funding in the city that comes from the government to the people for artistic endeavors. They put out a call every 2 years for someone to apply to be the Poet Laureate for a 2-year term. And, you know, it was something I really imagined I would do one day far into the future. And I'm just afraid of like hitting this wall one day, you know, that there's like nothing left to achieve in Edmonton and I'm going to have to move somewhere like Toronto, which I totally hate. And so, you know, I applied, I put my application in, I got all my references. It was very much like a job interview, except the panel was like 6 or 7 people and it included some city councilors. And so, you know, like I wasn't just appointed, I was chosen from a pool of applicants. And at some point, some of city council did consent for me to be in this position.
And what's the term and like how full-time is being the Poet Laureate?
Yeah, it's a 2-year term. And so I'm up in this June. So I started in 2019 and it's not that intensive. It's more of a role to be an ambassador for the literary arts in Edmonton. And so I'm invited to city council to do readings a couple times of the year. I'm also going to a lot of schools, meeting small children especially, and doing readings for them, talking about art and about poetry. And then I also sometimes will be at city events, like official functions. But of course, with the pandemic going on, that's all been very short-lived. So I'm going to have spent most of my term in a pandemic, which kind of changes the nature of it. But in general, the Poet Laureate, you'll see them at big events, you know, the State of the City address, or, you know, if there's a big conference or event happening in the city, they might be invited to do that. There's another question. How often do you write in a week? How many poems would you write in a year? You know, that's a tough question. I think for me as a performance poet, I'm going to just take a little bit of time to explain it. But, you know, my favorite moments of being a poet are performing, especially on stage in front of an audience. So I appreciate every opportunity I get to do that. And as a full-time performer and writer and also arts organizer, I started out doing about five or so performances a year. And now at kind of like the meat and potatoes of my career kind of building and taking off, I'm doing anywhere between 30 to 50 performances a year, you know? And so to write for those events, sometimes I write in advance new stuff. Sometimes I, you know, write things that I rehearse things that I've already written before. And I'd like to say that I write every week, but it honestly just varies. There's some poems that take a really long time to write that I've been trying to write for years. Other poems come out in half an hour, you know, so I don't try to have a regular practice where I sit down and I write for an hour every day, but I would say probably in a month, between all the different gigs I'm doing and the shows I'm producing and stuff like that, I'm probably writing, you know, 1 poem a week. but of course, like my other jobs are to mentor poets, to teach workshops, to tour when I was still traveling and stuff like that, tour across Canada and plan all these things out, right? Like, as all of you guys know, there's so much labor that goes into the planning of a single event. And imagine doing events for a living. So all the planning multiplies, right? Every single time you have to do it.
Well, Nisha, maybe we'll end it here. If there's no more questions from the audience, we're right at 7 o'clock. We're basically at time. So I just want to thank everybody that tuned in. I see we got a lot of familiar faces. Lauren, Maggie, who also is from the arts community and is a great event planner, helped us plan our last investment summit. Thanks for joining us again, Maggie.
Yep.
And I also want to give a quick shout out to my wife, Karen Tang, who introduced Nisha to me and got her to come here for us. And of course, the Writers Union of Canada that sponsored this performance. So with that, Nisha, thanks so much for joining us. If you have some time, you want to hang out, you look like you might be a gamer based on the so I'm guessing you're familiar with Discord. So we're going to be there all night. You want to join us, have some fun?
Yeah, no problem.
Anyways, otherwise, keep writing. And maybe we should ask you what it might cost to write a poem just for our community.
Yeah. We'll keep in touch. I hope everyone has a good night.
Okay.